The Mason Greenwood controversy has unfortunately been one that has really hung over Manchester United and the player himself like a massive dark black cloud, and there's some very serious allegations, but as things turned out, he will not be having to stand trial due to the Crown Prosecution Service choosing not to go ahead with the case due to a number of factors that we will be getting into in just a bit. Now, the case may have been dropped against Greenwood, but it is important to note that this doesn't necessarily make him guilt-free. In fact, it still leaves Manchester United with a rather obvious dilemma as to whether or not they can go ahead with the career of one of their players who is considered one of the brightest young stars from their academy, but who now has been marred by allegations of sexual assault, rape, coercive behavior, controlling behavior, and even common assault. So there's a lot of very heavy charges here. Even if they weren't enough to convict, the simple fact of the matter is, can Manchester United go ahead and actually continue to further Greenwood's career as if nothing ever happened? That's exactly what we're going to be looking at in this particular video. But before we go ahead and answer your questions, let's just quickly refresh the major incidents and how exactly it unfolded with a look at the timeline of events. Now, on January 31st, 2022, which is about a year back, Greenwood had been arrested for both rape and assault, and then a couple of days later he was in fact arrested again, this time for assault charges as well as intention to kill. So it really got ratcheted up as far as the level of the charges. Then in October 2022, the charges were formally brought on and he was officially charged on a charge sheet. So the expectation was that the next thing that would happen would be him going on trial, and the trial was expected to happen around November of 2023, but then in January of 2023, all the charges were dropped. Now, why exactly were they dropped? That is something that, to answer, it's not quite a simple thing, because again, when you see something like charges dropped, you immediately say, oh great, that means this person is innocent, they can just go ahead with their lives just like that. Not really, because again, if you go by what it is that the Crown Prosecution Service said, they only chose not to go ahead with the case because in their mind there was no chance of a conviction, but not because of assumed innocence. In fact, this is what the CPS statement said. They said that in this case there was a combination of withdrawal of key witnesses and new material that came to light, which meant that there was no longer a realistic prospect of conviction. In these circumstances, we are under a duty to stop the case. So the three major things to note: withdrawal of key witnesses, no longer a chance of conviction, and they were thus duty bound. But the most important thing to note is that there was a withdrawal of key witnesses. Now again, we don't have the full details of the story yet, but how is it that just before the case was set to go to trial, there were witnesses who chose not to take the stand, not to depose, and these witnesses not doing that made it that easy for Greenwood's case to just be dropped by the CPS. As I said, it doesn't really add up, and that is why perhaps Manchester United's statement on the matter was pretty ambiguous with regards to what exactly they will do as their next steps. In fact, this is what United said as their statement. They said that Manchester United notes the decision of the Crown Prosecution Service that all charges against Mason Greenwood have been dropped. The club will now conduct its own process before determining the next steps. Now, it is worth noting that as soon as Greenwood was arrested, as soon as this entire case became public, United did the right thing by actually choosing to suspend Greenwood, and he remained suspended until, of course, the investigation was dropped. And even now, really, they haven't officially revoked his suspension, so he remains suspended. And what the club intends to do is carry out an investigation of their own into the charges. Now, of course, you have to remember that a club investigation or an investigation of this sort doesn't necessarily have to comply with legal law. So whilst the prosecution service might have found no reason to take the case forward, United's findings may be very different, and even without the presence of certain evidence, they may choose to actually judge Greenwood guilty. And this is where they're in a very shaky moral dilemma, because it is worth noting that Greenwood didn't stand trial and come out innocent. In fact, the case didn't even make it to trial, and it just ended up getting dropped. So the key thing to note is that he's not really innocent in all of this. That is really one of the problems. And if it really gets down to the point where, one of the club's sponsors or certain fans actually demand action, that's not going to be too good a look on both the club and even the sponsors, because you don't want, much as it might seem harsh, you don't really want someone who has who's associated with or has been tarred with the brush of sexual assault, coercive behavior and attempts to kill. It just isn't a very good look for any company, never mind one as big as Manchester United. And this is something that has clearly apparently split the United hierarchy as well, because according to media reports in England and the Manchester area, there are divides within the United staff as to what would be the right course of action. And it's easy to understand why, because again, as I said, Greenwood wasn't really pronounced innocent after a trial. The case was dropped because they saw no realistic chance of conviction due to key witnesses dropping out. As I said, you don't need to be a detective to see that that's very suspicious, and that perhaps is why United have chosen not to revoke his suspension and just move around with business as usual as of now. They're choosing to hold an investigation of their own, and then and only then will they be able to take their next call. Now, for me personally, and for a lot of people out there, I think the take would be pretty simple, that it would be easier said than done to just reintegrate Greenwood into the side as if nothing had ever happened. It's been something that's had a profound effect on his career and even on United for that matter, because truth be told, they didn't really have any clarity as to when exactly this thing would get resolved. But the way it's gotten resolved is far from conclusive. In fact, Greenwood could very well be guilty, but he just didn't get to a point of conviction because of those key witnesses not deposing. And thus, that really is the point which United will have to debate. If they find that there is evidence that maybe wouldn't have made it to a court, but which further assumes Greenwood's guilt, are they going to be in a position to allow him to carry on with his career as a United player? I think not. I think it would make no sense to carry on with this, and that United might actually be better served cutting their ties. But again, we won't really know what exactly it is they do until it's out there in public. So as things stand, it remains in limbo, but it would be very, very difficult to come back from something this big, even though it didn't go to trial. That's just how I feel about it though. What do you guys think? Well, you can let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, tap the bell icon so you know when it is we're going live or uploading a new video, and also follow us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Last but not least, don't forget to download the AajTak app. Thank you all once again for joining us in this video. Don't forget to check out other videos on the channel if you're just joining us. For now though, goodbye.